He didn't recognize me. 5 years of keeping his house, raising his nephews, writing reports with his seal. And when Duke Sylus Lancaster rode through the gates, his gaze passed over me as though I were a stranger waiting to greet him. The courtyard rippled with sound, steel boots striking stone, banners unfurling, the cheer of villagers crowding at the gates. I stood at the steps of Blackthorn Keep with the 3 boys flanking me, my palms damp inside my gloves. "Is that him?" whispered Theo, the youngest, tugging my sleeve. His wide brown eyes mirrored the sunlight. "Is that Uncle Sylus?" "Yes," I whispered, my voice barely held. "That's him." He was taller now, broader. The boy who had left to fight a war had returned carved from it, the same dark hair, but shorter, shorn to a soldier's cut. A faint scar traced the line of his jaw, and his expression was all quiet discipline, the kind that silences even laughter. I'd spent 5 years remembering his face. And now I couldn't find him in it. When his horse stopped before the steps, he dismounted in one smooth motion. His armor caught the light, silver and red Lancaster colors. The crowd fell to silence. Only the boys dared move. "Uncle Sylus," cried Julian, the eldest at 12, running forward before I could stop him. Sylus's face softened instantly. He bent, catching Julian mid-run, spinning him once, laughing, the sound rough, like he hadn't used it in a long time. The other 2 followed, clinging to him, talking all at once. "You got taller," Sylus said, brushing Theo's hair back. "And you," he looked at little Henry, "you've your father's eyes." The air around them hummed with warmth. My chest tightened at the sight, all those years, all those nights of telling the boys stories about their uncle so they wouldn't forget his face. And now he was here. For them. Not for me. When he finally looked up, his eyes scanned the crowd, his steward, his knights, the servants lined up in formal rows. Then they landed on me. And stopped. He hesitated as if trying to place me. His gaze flicked to my gown, plain gray-blue, the color of practicality, not finery, to the ink smudges still faint on my hands. And then to my face. "Lady Bennet," he said after a moment, his tone polite, distant. "You've done well." The words landed like a stone. I dipped into a curtsy, heart hammering. "Your Grace." He nodded once, already turning back to the boys, to the soldiers, to everyone else. For 5 years, I had lived in the echo of his absence, and now that he stood 10 paces away, he might as well have still been at war. "Come inside, my lord," I said quietly, when the steward signaled the end of ceremony. "You must be tired. The men are being seen to, rooms have been prepared." He looked at me again, this time his brow furrowed slightly. Yes, of course." His voice softened. "You've kept this place alive, haven't you?" I forced a small smile. Someone had to. He studied me a moment longer, and then recognition. It came slowly, like sunlight creeping through a shutter. "Mary," he said under his breath as if testing the sound. "You've grown." 5 years ago, I'd have blushed at that. Now I only inclined my head. "Time does that, Your Grace." His gaze lingered, thoughtful, maybe even regretful, but I stepped aside before it could mean anything. Inside, the great hall came alive with motion. Servants rushed about, bringing wine and bread, polishing the silver that hadn't seen daylight in months. The boys trailed behind Sylus like ducklings, each desperate to speak first. "I've been training with wooden swords," Theo declared proudly. "Mary says I'll be knighted one day." "Mary says you used to sneak sweet cakes from the pantry." "Did she now?" Sylus said, glancing at me with something that almost resembled amusement. "She says you were terrible at keeping secrets," Julian added helpfully. That made him laugh, really laugh, and for a heartbeat, I saw the boy I remembered, the one who used to argue with the cook and steal apples from the orchard. I smiled, despite myself. Then I caught my reflection in the polished goblet someone handed me, older eyes, steadier hands, no trace of the girl who'd once dreamed of writing love letters to a duke. I turned away. By the time dusk fell, the hall was bright with candles, the celebration in full swing. The people of Blackthorn were toasting their hero. Sylus moved through them like a man both adored and unreachable, smiling when spoken to, listening more than talking. And I watched from the edges, unseen again. He caught my eye once across the crowd. His gaze held, searching, as if he wanted to say something. But a knight called his name, and the moment broke. Theo tugged at my sleeve, holding a half-eaten tart. "Mary, is Uncle Sylus staying this time?" I knelt, brushing the crumbs from his chin. "I think so, sweetheart." "Then you'll finally rest." I laughed softly. "Maybe." But as I looked across the hall, at the Duke surrounded by noise and glory, the man I'd loved without ever really knowing, I realized something with a chill that went all the way to my bones. He'd come home. But I wasn't sure I had a place here anymore. The great hall shimmered with light, too bright, too loud, too alive. 5 years of silence, of keeping this house breathing one cautious day at a time. And now, in a single evening, it pulsed again like a heart resuscitated. Music flooded the air. Servants ran with trays of wine, nobles laughed too loudly, and children darted between the tables with ribbons in their hair. And at the center of it all sat Sylus Lancaster. The Duke returned, the war hero, the man who had always belonged to the stories people told, never the reality I had to live through. I sat beside him at the head table, my hands folded neatly in my lap, though my pulse refused to obey. Everywhere I looked, eyes glittered with pride and relief. They spoke of him, his victories, his courage, his sacrifices. They toasted him like he'd carried the world on his shoulders alone. I tried to smile. It felt like pretending I hadn't been holding that same world steady in his absence. Then his voice cut through the noise, calm, deliberate, commanding. "Before you raise your cups again," he said, rising to his feet, "there's something that must be said." The hall fell still. "I may have fought the war," Sylus continued, "but it was Lady Bennet who won it here. She governed in my stead, saw to my nephew's education, and kept Lancaster alive when I could not. I return not to reclaim my title, but to thank the woman who preserved it." For a moment, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. I looked up at him, tall, solemn, impossibly distant, and wished he hadn't said it so perfectly. Because now they were all looking at me like a relic, something to admire and then forget once the applause faded. They cheered for his humility. Not my work. For his generosity in acknowledging me. My smile wavered, then steadied again. I'd learned long ago how to stay composed while falling apart. Later, after the third toast, I stepped down from the dais to breathe. The corridors were cooler, the music fainter, the air kinder. That's when I heard it, my name spoken in a voice that tugged a memory from somewhere soft and far away. Mary Bennet. I turned. Sebastian Vermont stood there, no longer the lanky boy who used to sneak bread from the kitchens, but a man in his prime, dressed in dark blue with the insignia of his house pinned at his collar. His smile was warm, untouched by the stiffness that plagued most noblemen. "Sebastian," I blinked, "I thought you'd gone south." "I did. Married, had a daughter, learned how to dance without stepping on anyone's toes," he said with a grin. "And then the Duke invited me here for his grand return." He glanced toward the hall where Sylus was still surrounded by admirers. "I wasn't expecting to find you at his side." "Neither was I murmured. He laughed softly, but there was understanding in his eyes. "You've done well, Mary. Everyone's saying so." I folded my arms. Everyone, saying it because he said it first. Sebastian tilted his head. "And yet, you've never been one to need someone else's approval." "No," I said quietly, "but I've grown tired of needing his." He studied me for a long moment, the candlelight flickering between us. "Then take a break. Rest. You've carried too much." I almost smiled. "You sound like my conscience." "Maybe I am," he said. "Or maybe I just miss the girl who used to laugh at everything." He was about to say more, when a new shadow fell across us. "Sylus." He looked between us, expression unreadable. "I didn't realize you two were acquainted." "Since childhood," Sebastian said lightly, unfazed. "We used to race horses through the orchard. She always won." Sylus's gaze lingered on me for a heartbeat longer than it should have. I see. He turned away, but his shoulders had stiffened. And that was how I knew he'd seen something he didn't want to. The feast bled into night. One by one, the guests retired, the music dimmed, and laughter turned to echoes. When at last I left the hall, the corridors felt unnaturally still, like the castle itself was holding its breath, waiting for life to return again. The servants had placed Sylus's belongings in the east chamber, crates of armor, sealed chests, and one battered trunk that looked like it had survived the war itself. I passed it once, then again. And then I stopped. The latch was broken. Curiosity, or perhaps something lonelier, won out. Inside were the remnants of a life I hadn't seen. War maps inked with dried blood, folded banners, letters tied with faded twine. And among them, one stood out. My name. Mary Bennett. His handwriting. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The wax seal was still intact, unopened, forgotten. For a moment I just stared at it, unable to breathe. 5 years of silence, and this had been here all along. Had he meant to send it? Had he changed his mind? I turned the letter over in my hands, uncertain whether to open it or throw it into the fire. And then, Mary. The voice froze me in place. He stood in the doorway, the candlelight catching faintly on his scarred cheek. His eyes flicked to the letter in my hand, and something dark, regret, maybe, crossed his face. I started, but he cut me off gently. Some things were never meant to be read. His tone was soft but final. He stepped forward, took the letter carefully from my hands. His fingers brushed mine, warm, brief, unbearably human. And then he turned away. Good night, Mary. The door shut behind him, and the silence that followed was heavier than the war itself. I stood there long after the candle burned low, staring at the space where the letter had been, wondering which of us had left the other unread. Peace is much louder than war. When Sylus left 5 years ago, the days were filled with urgency. Reports, messages, decisions that never waited. Now the halls are filled with the sound of nothing. No shouting, no panic, just the echo of a life that doesn't need me anymore. The celebration had ended 3 days ago, but the castle still looked hungover from joy, banners drooping, half-packed crates waiting to be moved, and wine stains on the marble floors no one had gotten around to scrubbing. Sylus had returned to his office that morning. So had I, out of habit, not necessity. He was standing by the window when I entered, reviewing the ledgers I'd kept for 5 years. His hair was unbound for once, a soft mess of dark curls that caught the sunlight. He looked younger like that, more human, and yet infinitely farther away. Your handwriting hasn't changed, he said without looking up. I suppose I never had time to practice a new one. A faint smile ghosted his lips, then vanished. You should rest. You've done enough. The estate is mine to manage now. There it was, the quiet dismissal, the peace I thought I wanted. I see, I said, setting the stack of papers down. Then you won't need me here tomorrow. He turned at that, frowning. That's not what I meant. I know, I lied. Our eyes met, and for the first time since his return, there was no formality between us, only silence. He looked as if he wanted to say something more, but the words never came. They never did. By midday, I found myself in the gardens, the one place untouched by war or men. Theo and Henry were playing near the fountain, their laughter carrying over the water. Julian was seated nearby, nose buried in a book, pretending not to smile at his brother's antics. Miss Mary, Theo called, waving a stick like a sword. Look, I'm Uncle Sylus. I defeated 20 enemies. Only 20, I teased. You'll have to do better than that. Henry laughed, charging after him. The noise was light, chaotic, alive, the kind of sound that made all the years worth it. For a brief moment, I forgot the ache in my chest. Then a shadow fell across the grass. Seems you've kept them well behaved, Sebastian's voice said behind me. I turned, startled but smiling. You sound surprised. I'm impressed, he said, walking closer. My own daughter throws bread rolls at dinner when I tell her to study. She has good instincts, I replied, and he laughed, easy, genuine, the kind of sound that didn't hurt to hear. We talked for a while, about nothing and everything. The children joined, eager for new stories, and Sebastian obliged, telling them tales of seas and faraway cities. His warmth filled the garden like sunlight through a window. And then, across the courtyard, I saw Sylus watching us. He stood near the staircase, arms folded, his expression unreadable. When our eyes met, he looked away as if caught staring. Does he ever smile? Sebastian asked softly, following my gaze. Sometimes, I said, when no one's watching. That evening I packed a small chest, not much, just enough for travel. A knock came. Come in, I said. Sylus stepped inside. He looked tired, not from war, but from something quieter. You're leaving, he said, eyes flicking to the open chest. I thought I'd rest for a few weeks. You said yourself I've done enough. He nodded slowly, but his jaw tightened. You're not running away, are you? Would it matter if I was? Of course it would. I looked up at him, and for the briefest moment, something unguarded flickered in his expression. Regret, confusion, maybe fear. He took a slow breath. Marry I. But then he stopped, just like before. Good night, I said quietly. He nodded once, turned and left. The door closed behind him, and the words he hadn't said lingered in the air like ghosts. I'd packed and unpacked my trunk 3 times before sunrise. Henry's fever had passed. The house was calm again, too calm. The boys played in the courtyard. I told myself I'd leave quietly, without fuss, while everyone was busy. But Lancaster boys have the hearing of hounds. Where are you going? Theo demanded the moment he saw the carriage being loaded. His hair was still a golden mess, his small hands balled into fists. To visit my aunt, I said gently, just for a few weeks. Julian's face fell, without saying goodbye. I'm saying it now, I smiled, kneeling down to their height. You'll hardly notice I'm gone, you have your uncle now. Henry, pale but recovering, looked at me with wide, uncertain eyes. But you're coming back, right? You always come back. I hesitated, and that hesitation was all it took. Theo's lip trembled. You're not going to marry Uncle Sylus, are you? The question hit like a blade through silk, too innocent, too sharp. Who told you that? I asked softly. Everyone knows, Julian said. You're his fiancée, and if you leave, maybe he'll marry someone else. Theo's voice cracked. He can't, you belong here. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because the truth was I didn't know what we were anymore. Promise, duty, habit. A future that had been decided for me before I was old enough to understand what it meant. I don't, I began, but then another voice answered for me. You're right, Sylus said from the steps. The boys turned instantly, beaming. He descended the stairs with that effortless grace only soldiers seem to have, calm, steady, entirely in control. Lady Bennet is my fiancée, he said, his voice even, reassuring. And one day we will marry, but for now she's going to visit her aunt, that's all. The children relaxed, believing him without question. I, on the other hand, could barely breathe. The words were meant for them, not for me, a promise spoken like a soothing lie. And yet, a part of me wanted to believe it anyway. He crouched to the boy's level, his tone softening. While she's away, you'll be good. You'll study, you'll train, and when she returns, I expect her to be proud. Theo nodded solemnly. Henry sniffled. Julian tried to look brave. Then Sylus stood, his eyes finding mine. I'll see you off, he said quietly. The courtyard was still as I approached the carriage. The air smelled of rain again, the same scent as the night I'd stood on the balcony watching him from above. Sebastian was already there, holding his hat in his hands. So it's true, he said softly. You're really leaving. For a while, I replied. The children will be fine, Sylus is. A capable man, Sebastian finished for me, but not an easy one. I smiled faintly. You've always been good at understatement. He chuckled. I'll miss your letters. You still owe me a rematch at chess. I'll let you win next time. I'd rather lose to you properly, he said, voice warm but edged with something wistful. Sylus joined us then, his presence cutting through the moment like a shadow across sunlight. He nodded politely to Sebastian, just enough civility to hide the strain beneath. The road to Whitby is long, he said to me, right when you arrive. I will. He hesitated, then added, and Mary, thank you for everything. It was a farewell dressed as gratitude, and I hated how final it sounded. I climbed into the carriage before he could see the way my hands trembled. Through the window, I saw the children waving, Sebastian standing a few steps behind Sylus, and Sylus himself, perfectly still, perfectly unreadable. For 5 years, I'd built my life around a man who never asked me to. And as the carriage rolled away, I realized the silence between us had finally found its shape. It wasn't distance. It was goodbye. The air at Whitby Manor smelled different. Warmer, gentler, like lilacs and bread just out of the oven. After 5 years of marble halls and military precision, the creak of my aunt's country estate felt like music. The maids hummed as they worked, the gardens were half wild, and the sun seemed to linger a little longer here. I slept through the first 2 days. My body refused to believe it was allowed to rest. By the third, my aunt had declared I looked half alive and insisted on a walk through the orchard. She talked the whole time about crops, gossip, and her neighbor's scandalous new cat. And for once, I didn't have to think about budgets or tutors or a duke's dinner guests. It was nice. Almost too nice. Then, one morning, the butler announced a visitor. Count Sebastian Vermont and family, my lady. I blinked. Family. Before I could ask further, the door opened, and there he was, looking exactly as he always did. Composed, smiling, sunlight in his eyes. Beside him stood a woman in a soft lavender gown, holding a small girl who looked like she'd swallowed the sun. Mary, Sebastian greeted, bowing slightly. Forgive the intrusion. My wife insisted on calling when she heard you were near. The woman stepped forward, with a warmth that made me like her instantly. Lady Bennet, she said, taking my hands. I've heard so much about you. I'm Lillian. Please, I said, smiling despite myself, just Mary. The little girl peeked out from behind her skirts. This is Clara, Lillian said, gently nudging her forward. She's 6 and terribly shy unless you mention ponies. At that, Clara straightened and said very seriously, Do you have ponies? I laughed. A few, though I can't promise they're as fast as yours. She grinned, instantly convinced we'd be friends. The visit stretched from tea to supper. Lillian was the kind of woman who could make an entire room exhale, quick to laugh, unbothered by silence, and utterly devoted to her family. Watching the 3 of them together was like stepping into a painting of what a real life looked like. When Clara grew drowsy, Lillian excused herself to take her upstairs, leaving Sebastian and me alone in the drawing room. You look better here, he said, breaking the quiet. You belong in sunlight, not in that cold fortress. I smiled faintly. The fortress has children who need me. His gaze softened. Children can't be the only reason you stay somewhere. He leaned back, considering me with that same quiet intensity he'd always had. You've been surviving so long, you've forgotten what living feels like. I laughed, not unkindly, but to deflect the sting of truth. And what does living feel like, Count Vermont? He smiled. Like this, tea gone cold, too much sunlight, and people who look at you and actually see you. The words shouldn't have hurt, but they did. Because for a moment, I realized I'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Later that night, as I stood by the window watching the lamps flicker in the valley below, I thought of Sylus. Did he notice the silence of the halls without me there? Did the boys ask where I'd gone? Or had my absence blended into the noise of his triumph, just another shadow left behind by a long war? I told myself it didn't matter, that this peace was enough. But deep down, I knew it was only a borrowed dream. And borrowed dreams always end when the morning comes. The night before he was meant to leave, Whitby was wrapped in mist. It had rained again, light, steady rain that blurred the edges of the world. I'd gone to the garden after dinner, pretending to admire the moonlight through the fog. In truth, I was running from his glances across the table, from my aunt's knowing smiles, from the feeling that every breath near him had become too heavy to take. I didn't hear him approach until he spoke. "You always run when you think too much." His voice startled me. I turned, and there he was, coat half-buttoned, hair damp from the mist. The candlelight from the house spilled through the windows behind him, outlining him in gold. "I wasn't running," I said softly. He stepped closer, eyes steady. "Then why does it feel like I've been chasing you since the moment I came back?" I wanted to laugh, to deflect, to say something light, but my throat had forgotten how. Instead, I whispered, "You shouldn't be here." "I should have been here years ago." The words hit me like a storm breaking open. He moved closer, not enough to touch, just enough for the air between us to tremble. "When the war dragged on," he said, his voice low and rough, "I kept telling myself I was fighting for the duchy, for duty, but the truth is—" He stopped, swallowed hard, and then met my eyes. "I ended it early. I left command to my men and returned because I couldn't bear another year without coming home to you, to them, to us." My breath caught. "Sylus." He took a step forward, rain glistening on his sleeves. "There were nights I dreamed of this house, of the sound of you scolding the boys, of your handwriting on my reports. Every time I came back, you were there not as my betrothed, not as a duty, but as the only thing that ever felt like home." He reached for my hand, hesitant at first, as though afraid I'd vanish if he touched me. When his fingers closed around mine, it felt like the world itself exhaled. "There's no woman I could dream of marrying but you," he said, almost a whisper. "And if you truly wish to leave me, I'll let you go, but not before you know that I never wanted anyone else." His grip trembled slightly, not commanding, not demanding, but pleading. I stared at him, the man I had loved in silence for years, the man who'd never looked at me this way before, and the ache in my chest was too big for words. "I waited for you," I said, my voice breaking. "Every letter, every winter I waited, and when you came back you looked right through me." He flinched. "I didn't know how to see you anymore. You weren't the girl I left behind, you were stronger, calmer, everything I was. You terrified me, Mary." "Terrified you?" "Because I realized that, while I was away fighting a war, you were the one winning mine." Silence fell deep, trembling, alive. The rain fell harder now, soft against the leaves. His hand was still holding mine, warm even in the chill air. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I'm asking you to come home, not for duty, not for the children, for me." My heart felt like it was burning and breaking all at once. And though every part of me wanted to fall into his arms, another part whispered of all the years spent waiting, of all the times I'd begged the stars for this moment, and how cruel it would be to believe too easily. "I don't know if I can trust this," I whispered. He nodded once, eyes soft, voice raw. "Then let me earn it." The road to Lancaster had never felt so long. I'd made this journey dozens of times before, returning from visits, from errands, from the endless duties of a household that never truly rested. But this time, every mile carried something different. Every turn in the road whispered questions I wasn't ready to answer. The sky was pale when the carriage crested the last hill. From there, the Lancaster estate stretched below like a painting, the river curving behind the gardens, the towers rising proud and gray against the dawn. The boys saw me first. Julian spotted the carriage through the window and nearly threw himself down the stairs in his rush to open the door. Theo and Henry weren't far behind. The moment I stepped down, they collided into me all at once, a tangle of laughter and tears and too tight arms. "You came back," Henry shouted. "I told you she would," Theo declared proudly. Julian sniffed. "Uncle said he'd fetch you if you didn't." I laughed, wiping my eyes as I knelt to hold them close. Did he now? From the top of the steps, a voice answered. I did. Sylus stood there, dressed simply in dark linen, no medals, no titles hanging off him, just a man waiting. The children didn't notice the look we exchanged. They were too busy pulling me toward the hall, talking over each other. But for a single heartbeat, the world shrank to that one moment, his eyes meeting mine, the faintest breath of relief on his face. And I knew then, something had changed. The estate felt alive again. Letters and reports still came in, but the air no longer carried that heavy stillness. Laughter echoed in corners that had forgotten it, and for the first time, Sylus didn't shut himself away in his study. He joined breakfast with the children. He let them talk over him. He walked through the gardens with me, quietly, carefully, as though afraid one wrong word might send me running again. And sometimes, when our hands brushed, he didn't pull away. The night air outside was cool, laced with the scent of rain-soaked earth. He led me to the terrace overlooking the gardens, where moonlight traced silver across the stone. When I first came back, he said quietly, I thought I'd lost everything. I didn't know how to speak to you anymore, how to be with you. You didn't have to say anything, I murmured. You were home, that was enough. He shook his head. It was, not for me, not after realizing that home had been you all along. He turned to face me then, and his eyes, usually so unreadable, were bare, open, almost boyish in their honesty. Mary, he said softly, you kept everything alive while I was gone, the house, the children, me. I came back and found a world you, built out of patience and pain, and he faltered, voice catching. I didn't know how to deserve it. You don't have to deserve it, I whispered. You just have to want it. He exhaled, something like a laugh and a sigh mingled together. Then, very carefully, he reached out, and this time, when his fingers found mine, I didn't pull away. I want you, he said simply, not because of duty, but because I love you. The words broke something open inside me. For years, I'd dreamed of hearing them. For years, I'd told myself I didn't need to. I stepped closer, close enough to see the faint scar along his jaw, the exhaustion beneath his eyes, the tenderness that had been hiding there all this time. You have a terrible sense of timing, Your Grace, I whispered. His smile was small but real. I'm aware. And then he kissed me. It wasn't a grand, sweeping kiss like in the stories. It was quiet, hesitant, reverent, as though he was afraid I'd vanish if he held on too tightly. But when I didn't pull away, when I leaned in and let years of silence dissolve between us, his hand came to rest at the back of my neck, and the world stilled. For once there was no duty, no fear, just us. As we walked back toward the house, sunlight spilling across the stones, I thought of how everything had begun, a frightened girl, a weary soldier, and 5 years of unspoken hope. And somehow, against all odds, it had led us here. Home,